started. Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Garrett Okersinski and I am a project director on the social responsibility team at Fishwise, and I will be facilitating the presentation today. Fishwise is a nonprofit consultancy with a mission to sustain ocean ecosystems and the people who depend on them by transforming global seafood supply chains. This webinar is the fifth in a series of capacity building webinars hosted by Sea Alliance in collaboration with Global Tuna Alliance, World Benchmarking Alliance, and Fishwise. And today we'll be discussing decent work. This webinar is being recorded and participants' audio and video functions are disabled. However, we do encourage you to engage via the chat and then submit questions using the Q&A feature. So if you have any technical issues, please send the host a message and we will try to help sort that out. As I mentioned, this is the fifth webinar in a series. The webinar recordings are being hosted on the Sea Alliance website. If you are unable to attend the last few live, please go check out those recordings. But in the meantime, we're going to just drop a few points in the chat to recap the last session on worker engagement. You'll also see our next webinar, our final webinar, will be discussing responsible purchasing practices and incentivizing positive change. And that will be on April 20th. And we're going to drop a link to the Eventbrite in the chat as well. So to quickly go over the agenda today, first off, we're going to start at the top with some recommendations that we'll be unpacking over the course of the webinar. Then we're going to lay the groundwork for decent work and discuss considerations for decent work at sea. We will then review 4 pillars of vessel safety and how they support decent work. And then we're going to hear from the ILO on one of the pillars in particular, the Work in Fishing Convention, and then from Andy Hickman, the head of Sea Alliance, on Sea Alliance's advocacy efforts. And then we're going to dive into how to start identifying and assessing at-sea operations and how to incorporate those findings into actions. And then finally, we're pleased to have Thai Union join us today to discuss their Sea Change program and how they're working to improve working conditions and vessels. So why are we focusing on decent work? Decent work has been called out as one of the 3 Roadmap for Improving Seafood Ethics, or RISE, foundations, because working to achieve decent work is core to making lasting improvements in seafood supply chains. Decent work has been identified as a foundation, not because it's more important than decent work for all, but because seafood companies may need to take unique and specific measures related to at-sea improvements in order to create decent work in their supply chains. We'll be talking more about some of these unique considerations in just a moment. But let's first just review the recommendations that we'll be unpacking. First, we're going to be talking about advocate for ratification and implementation of international agreements that support and enforce safety measures and labor standards on vessels. Second recommendation is to identify and assess risks for workers and at-sea operations by engaging with workers and evaluating vessel behavior. And the third is integrate the findings to engage with suppliers to ensure traceability at the vessel level and work with local organizations to support pre-departure trainings. And again, we're going to unpack these. But first, I think it's important to lay the foundation for what is decent work. The International Labor Organization states decent work sums up the aspirations of people in their working lives. It involves opportunities for work that is productive and delivers fair income, security in the workplace and social protection for all, better prospects for personal development and social integration, freedom for people to express their concerns, organize and participate in decisions that affect their lives, and equality of opportunity and treatment for all women and men. Decent work focuses on productive employment, rights at work, social protection, and the promotion of social dialogue. To illustrate decent work a little more, I wanted to share ILO's 10 indicators to measure progress towards decent work. So you'll see them on the screen, but employment opportunities, adequate earnings and productive work, decent work time, combining work, family, and personal life, work that should be abolished, stability of security of work, equal opportunity and treatment in employment, safe working environment, social security, and social dialogue. As noted on RISE, decent work means equality, fair income, and safe working conditions. However, at-sea workers face particular challenges to achieve these conditions and therefore required increased protections. 60 million workers engage in fishing or seafood operations globally, with over 15 million working full-time on vessels. Fishing, particularly distant water fishing, is one of the most challenging and dangerous occupations in the world. Fishers are dealing with long hours, dangerous weather, slick surface, tight quarters, heavy machinery, limited access to medical facilities and emergency support, and can be isolated at sea with little form of communication and connectivity, just to name a few. And unfortunately, there are significant gaps in protections for fisheries, and some companies still remain unaware of the human and labor rights risks, including forced overtime, low wages, threats, intimidation, and physical violence. Again, just to name a few. So we do have a quick introductory RISE eLearn it's free. You just need to provide your email, but it's a great decent work at sea 101 that I recommend you checking out and sharing with your networks to help kind of build that foundation of decent work. But to mention a few considerations to evaluate and promote decent work at sea, the following are some considerations that you need to examine within your supply chains. So what are the conditions on vessels? Are vessels safe to operate, and do they have necessary life-saving equipment on board? How were the workers recruited? Were workers aware of the conditions and the type of work that they would be doing? Did they incur recruitment-related fees? Do fishers have access to grievance mechanisms and other outlets to express concerns or to safely communicate with their employer? What are the working hours? How will workers be returned home after their contract? And what data do you have access to, and how is it being verified? And how are vessel behaviors being monitored? And are workers able to leave the vessel and move freely when in port and on land? And there's a RISE resource just for you guys to refer to later around more of those considerations that we will share. There are 4 international conventions and agreements that comprise the 4 pillars of vessel safety. Together, these 4 work together as the backbone for reducing illegal activity, increasing environmental protections, and promoting fisher safety and welfare at the international stage. The 4 pillars of vessel safety are ILO's Working in Fishing Convention, or C-188, Port State Measure Agreement, the IMO's Cape Town Agreement, and the IMO's Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping for Fishing Vessel Personnel. And I'm a visual learner myself, so I built a very basic infographic to try to help illustrate how all these work together. So first, the Working in Fishing Convention, also referred to as C-188, seeks to ensure decent standards for all fishers regarding conditions of service, accommodation, and food, occupational safe and health, as well as medical care and social security. And we'll hear more on this later. The second is the Port State Measures Agreement that aims to prevent, deter, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. It is also the first binding international agreement to specifically target IUU fishing and work to ensure legal catch. The third is the International Maritime Organization's Cape Town Agreement. The agreement outlines fishing vessel standards and includes other regulations designed to protect the safety of crew and observers. And the fourth is the IMO Standard of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping for Fishing Vessel Personnel. And it sets this certification and minimum training requirements for crew of seagoing fishing vessels with the aim to promote the safety of life at sea and the protection of the marine environment. And now with that quick background, it brings us to our first recommendation, that it's important that companies advocate for the ratification and implementation of these international agreements, as it will help support and enforce safety and vessel standards. So with that, I would like to introduce Christine Bader from the ILO. Christine has been involved in the supervision and the application by member states of the ILO conventions specific to shipping and the fishing sectors, and has contributed to the Maritime Labor Convention and the Working and Fishing Convention. She's currently actively promoting the Maritime Labor Convention and Working and Fishing Convention, and developing tools and providing training and technical assistance to achieving wider ratification and better implementation and effective enforcement. So Christine will dive a little deeper today in the Working and Fishing Convention and discuss where we stand on ratification. So thank you so much for being with us today. Take it away.
Yes, good day, everybody. Thank you for having me. So I'm Christine Brader from the ILO, and I'm happy that there are other pioneers taking forward the cause of, the good cause of decent work, which is, of course, the core mandate of the ILO. So I will talk to you about the Working Fishing Convention, which was adopted in 2007 and entered into force in 2017, which is really the social pillar, if you want, of the international legal framework of fishing, or if you see it as a temple with 4 pillars, it's the temple of sustainable fisheries, I would say, sustainable fishing. So in 2017, it entered into force. We are not yet at universal ratification, far from that, but we still, can you show the next slide, please? We have 21 ratifications, of which 11 are in Europe, 7 in Africa, 2 in the Americas, and 1 in Asia. The latest ratification we're very proud of, which is an important one, is Spain, which ratified 10 days ago. And it's, of course, an important fishing nation. There are more in the pipeline. Many countries are working on ratification. Of course, many EU member states as well, because they are already have to implement the directive that is based on many provisions of Convention 188. And then there are several African states and Asian states working on it. Next slide, please. So, of course, I think you all care about social sustainability, and in order to achieve social sustainability, you need, first of all, you need respect for the fundamental principles and rights at work. Now, what is this? You see here now 5 blocks. The first one is freedom of association and collective bargaining. The eradication of forced labor is the second, then the abolition of child labor, the elimination of discrimination at work, and since last year, the safe and healthy working environment. Now, these fundamental principles and rights at work have really the status of human rights at work. They are considered so important that the ILO asks from its member states, by virtue of membership, to respect these principles, regardless of the ratification of the related fundamental conventions. But of course, this is not enough for decent work at sea, right? And there, Convention 188, the Working Fishing Convention, comes in, which is really a Bill of Rights of Fishers, if you want, or the roadmap for decent work. And it covers literally all aspects of the world of work of a fisher. It passing from the minimum requirements to work on board, such as minimum age, which is set at 16 in the convention, and medical examination, going on to conditions of service, such as hours of rest, the minimum hours of rest, recruitment and placement provisions for fishers, the fisher's work agreement requirement. So every fisher has to have a written signed work agreement, minimum manning requirements, repatriation entitlement of the fisher, the payment, the regularity of payment, Then accommodation requirements, which may be more detailed and technical, the bigger, and of course, for new vessels, there are very detailed requirements in the convention. A food and water requirement, absolutely essential. There are medical care provisions in the convention, occupational safety and health provisions on training, familiarization training, fishing gear training, basic safety training, then also, of course, personal protective equipment, etc. And then, not last but not least, and of course a complex issue, the social security for fishers and their protection in the case of work-related sickness, injury, or death. And of course, all these requirements also in turn help achieve the fundamental principles and rights at work, the respect for these fundamental principles and rights at work, because as you see, for instance, the minimum age provisions, of course, contribute to the abolition of child labor. There are many, many provisions that will have a very preventive effect, that represent a safeguard against forced labor, because if you have, for instance, the fishers' work agreements are, tackle the vulnerability and the deception of fishers. Their regular payment tackles, one of the indicators that we have for forced labor is, for instance, the withdrawal of payment of wages. The cruelest requirement, there's a cruelest requirement in the convention that every fishing vessel needs to carry a cruelist, so you know who goes out and who doesn't. The fair recruitment provisions of the convention, all these have a very preventive effect on forced labor and contribute to their to the achievement of these fundamental principles and rights at work. So this is that you note that Convention 188 is a sine qua non for social sustainability. But even if you think about, next slide, please. If you think about economic sustainability, it is an important instrument to support. And here I always cite the wonderful ILO Constitution, which is 100 years old, but has this clause saying that the failure of any nation to adopt humane conditions of labor is an obstacle in the way of other nations which desire to improve the conditions in their own countries. Which is nothing else than basically 100 years ago, the founders of the ILO talk about what is the risk of globalization, namely unfair competition. And that is exactly the reason, the main reason why the employers, which are really, as you know, the ILO is tripartite. It is composed not only of governments, but uniquely in the UN system, of governments, employers organizations, and workers organizations. And employers have been, from the outset, very much in support of Convention 188. Why? Because Convention 188, if widely ratified, implemented, and enforced, establishes a level playing field for those countries and for those fishing vessel owners and operators committed to providing decent working and living conditions for fishers, and it will protect them from unfair competition on the part of substandard fishing vessels. And the convention also contains the no more favorable treatment clause, which seeks to ensure that countries and ships flying the flag of countries that have ratified the convention are placed at a competitive disadvantage. This relates essentially to the context of port state control, where ships flying a foreign flag of a non-ratifying country and call at a port of a ratifying country are more likely to be inspected on the basis of Convention 188. Next slide, please. Convention 188 can also help improving environmental sustainability. Of course, you all know about IUU fishing, so illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, the scourge for sustainable oceans. But have you ever heard about the link between IUU fishing and the absence of decent work? It has indeed been observed that IUU fishing is often associated with forced labor and labor abuse on board fishing vessels. And Interpol, for instance, talks about the so-called crime convergence. Vessels engaged in IUU fishing are likely to commit other serious organized crimes, including human trafficking, forced labor, and labor exploitation. And it even says that these this labor exploitation and human trafficking have become in recent years the main pillars of contemporary fisheries crime. And Convention 188, if ratified and implemented and enforced, will contribute to addressing IUU fishing. Why? Because ratifying states will strengthen their legal frameworks and establish decent working and living conditions for fishers, for instance, through requirements such as crew lists, written work agreement, fair recruitment, which help prevent exploitative labor practices and forced labor and obstruct an enabling environment for IUU. And ratifying states will also enforce this legal framework through flag state inspection and also port state control, which will detect human rights abuses and exploitative labor practices, which will in turn help combat IUU because these crimes are, according to Interpol, facilitative crimes. So next slide. So on all fronts of sustainability, it makes sense to support Convention 188. So, but how to do that? As I said, ILO is tripartite. So employers, companies, employers' organizations have an equal voice and vote, just like workers and governments. So there are lots of entry points. Convention 188 was elaborated in a long 2-year process and adopted by the Tripartite International Conference. So tripartite involvement every step of the way. Where countries have not yet ratified Convention 188, you can always liaise, employers can always liaise with their representative employers organizations at the national level and encourage them to engage in tripartite consultations aimed to ratify the convention. Where countries have ratified Convention 188, employers' organizations are involved on a continuous basis in the supervision of Convention 188, because governments need to report to the ILO, and employers and workers can always supplement the government's report on how it applies the convention. You can encourage the government, regardless of ratification, to start implementing Convention 188, including by modifying or adopting laws, regulations, and other measures, preparing enforcement. Fishing vessel owning companies can already start working to ensure that their vessels meet Convention 188 standards, and companies buying seafood products can advocate that relevant fishing vessel owning companies and vessels meet Convention 188 standards. So, and lastly, you have now become a little bit more knowledgeable about Convention 188 and should become even more knowledgeable so as to raise awareness and participate in all, weigh in all these discussions concerning the convention. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate you going into detail. And next, we're going to hear from Andy Hayman, the head of Sea Alliance, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but wanted to speak briefly to Sea Alliance's advocacy efforts, advocacy and engagement efforts. He recorded a short video for us.
Hi, everyone. I'm here to provide a quick update on advocacy in relation to decent work at sea. So as you'll know, advocacy is a key element of the Sea Alliance strategy alongside human rights due diligence and our Change on the Water Fund. Last year, we set out an advocacy strategy that focuses on 4 key conventions that we want to see ratified and effectively implemented. Those are the FAO Port State Measures Agreement, the IMO Cape Town Agreement on Fishing Vessel Safety, the IMO Convention on Standards for Training, Certification and Watchkeeping for Fishing Vessels, and the ILO Work in Fishing Convention. Our main outreach so far has been focused on the IMO Cape Town Agreement. At the end of last year, we wrote to over 120 government ministries across 40 countries, highlighting the importance of the IMO Cape Town Agreement and asking those countries to ratify and implement it at the earliest opportunity. We received some really constructive and detailed responses from the countries we wrote to. So in follow-up to that advocacy, in the next few weeks, we're going to be writing to countries about the ILO Work in Fishing Convention. And that ILO Work in Fishing Convention is really the critical one when it comes to ensuring decent work at sea. We've identified 60 countries in the Sea Alliance member company supply chains, and we'll be reaching out to those countries that haven't yet ratified and implemented the ILO Work in Fishing Convention. We know this is about much more than just writing letters, and so we hope to support our member companies to do direct outreach, to meet with government officials in order to raise the importance of this key convention, and to also understand any particular challenges that they see that they would like to see overcome. As always, we know that we can achieve much more by working together on these topics. So please do get in touch with Georgia Worrell, who leads our advocacy working group, or with myself if you have any ideas on advocacy that we can do working together, or with any other organizations. I'm now going to hand back to Garrett, who's going to take you through the next bit of the webinar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andy. While advocacy efforts are underway and ratification will make enforcement easier, companies are still responsible for working conditions in which seafood is harvested. Companies should take steps to better engage and understand conditions at sea and hear from workers on what needs to be improved. In addition to engaging with workers, companies can take steps to evaluate vessel behavior to understand potential risks. So you'll notice on that recommendation, that asterisk next to engaging workers. So as we discussed in the last part of the webinar, a part of human rights due diligence is meaningfully engaging stakeholders, including workers. Engaging with workers, their representatives, or grassroots organizations that support fishers will assist companies in identifying and prioritizing interventions. As a reminder, before engaging with fishers, especially ones that may be vulnerable on vessels, isolated at sea with no protections from reprisal, it's important to have proper protections in place. Due to the vulnerabilities and difficulties to engage with workers at sea, it's important to tap into and support existing trusted networks. For example, seek to connect with existing unions or local organizations like Stella Maris, who we heard from in the last webinar, just as an example. In addition to engaging with workers, conducting a desktop assessment of vessels will also help inform due diligence steps. In evaluating vessel behavior, you'll be able to prioritize high-risk vessels and determine if a vessel's behaviors are aligning with your sourcing policies. As you know, foundational to due diligence is traceability. So first, it's important to determine if you have access to vessel data, including IMO numbers, if applicable. If you don't, start to engage with your procurement team and suppliers to determine if this information is available and make it a requirement of sourcing. If you do have access to vessel data, to promote decent work at sea, assess the prevalence of the following practices in your supply chain. For example, look at use of flags of convenience. Are there at-sea transshipment events? Are they monitored or unmonitored? Is there vessel tracking and traceability? What practices are used to recruit workers? Is there connectivity at sea, and is there an ability for workers to share grievances? What's the time at sea? How long do vessels spend out at sea? Are there legal protections for migrant workers versus national fishers? What are the working hours and payment process? And again, these are just a few identifying factors to look at when trying to assess vessel behavior. And so I'm just going to take a moment to try to help illustrate this point. I'm going to share a Fishwise service on how you can evaluate vessel behavior and engage with suppliers to better understand potential risks and points of intervention within a specific supply chain. So in this Fishwise service, this vessel transparency service, we're supporting our partners to identify high-risk vessel behaviors and engage their supply chain partners on policies and practices they have in those suppliers to identify and mitigate potential abuses on board. So for example, in this service, we can select a particular product and we can focus on, for example, distant water fishing for tuna, because we know there's an increased risk of IUU fishing and forced labor occurrences due to the lack of monitoring and oversight on the high seas. Presence of practices like at-sea transshipment allow for vessels to spend long periods at sea while the catch is offloaded and supplies replenished. And we know the longer that workers are away from shore and isolated at sea, the greater risk for potential abuses it can increase. For these reasons, it's important to intermittently verify vessel activity using AIS data and engage with suppliers not only on data collection and reporting, but equally how are they monitoring working conditions. So in this service, we start by identifying a high-risk product, for example, like tuna, to begin digging in with our supply chain partners and request specific harvest data, including vessel lists from that targeted supplier. Then we identify a subsample of vessels determined by time at sea, fishing location, availability of AIS, among other requirements. And we request additional information related to working condition on those specific vessels. This information demonstrates how vessels within a supplier operations are monitored, and if a supplier has policies and protocols in place to track and maintain that accurate vessel data and the associated labor information. And then we use all this information together, both self-reported and third-party verified, to form retailer and supplier specific recommendations. And the value of these recommendations are they focus on the specific vessel behavior and how vessels and working conditions and safety are monitored at a systems level. So if you're interested, please reach out to Fishwise. We can talk more about that, but I thought that was just a helpful example to say, how do you use the existing data? So with that example, it brings us to our final recommendation of how to integrate findings to engage with workers or to engage with suppliers to ensure traceability at the vessel level and work with local organizations to support the pre-departure training. We recommend companies to take what you've learned from stakeholder engagement and the review of the vessel behavior to integrate those findings into a strategy. Update your sourcing policy to include vessel level traceability and access to vessel lists. In addition, update your commitments to align to include specifics on decent work at sea, like sourcing from countries that have ratified and are working to implement C-188 or port date measures. In addition to health and safety fundamentals, be sure to include responsible recruitment, time at sea, and promoting freedom of association, as they are key elements that will support decent work. And then engage with and support local organizations who are working directly with fishers or who already may be doing pre-departure training or providing resources for vessels. Identify opportunities and resources to support vessels to implement the changes that have been identified. And then identify ways to promote and improve communication so that grievances can be raised beyond the limited time that they may spend in port, so that connectivity is improved with family and trusted networks on land. And like I mentioned earlier in the last webinar, we did hear from Stella Maris on their Wi-Fi on board campaign for Taiwanese vessels. And this is an example of trying to improve that connectivity. And essential to integrating and acting on findings is providing remedy when issues are found. Remediation is not only hoping to solve issues at the root cause so they don't reoccur, but it's also aimed at righting the wrongs so that wrongs that have happened to workers. So specifically in the decent work XC context, this could include repatriation, recruitment related fees, but importantly, I want to highlight it's any others identified by workers. And it's crucial here to work closely and collaboratively with local civil society organizations to support remedy for workers. As discussed in previous webinars, the World Benchmarking Alliance has the Seafood Stewardship Index, and I just recommend going here to measure your company's progress, and feel free to reach out to Helen Packard at the World Benchmarking Alliance for more information. And we will be following this webinar with a one-pager, and we'll have more information for you there and how to contact Helen. So next, I would like to introduce our last speakers, Tracy Murai and Leah Hayman, who work in the responsible sourcing team for Thai Union, who will share more about Thai Union's Sea Change program. Tracy is the Assistant Global Director for Marine and Fisheries, and Leah is the Seafarer Work and Worker Welfare Manager. Thank you so much for being here today, and over to you guys.
Thanks, Garrett. Erin, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, we'll see if all this works seamlessly. Thanks for the introduction, Garrett. So just a slide to introduce what we're doing at Thai Union here. For those of you who don't know, we're one of the world's largest seafood producers, but we do not own any fishing vessels, but we source from many of them all over the world. So on the screen, you can see our summary of a sustainability strategy called Sea Change and the website we have for it. This strategy covers our global program on these topics. And actually, as Garrett just mentioned, so we've actually been independently reviewed by the Seafood Stewardship Index and the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, who ranked us #1 on both of these. And within the strategy, you can see at the bottom right corner there, we've got our 4 programs or pillars, and one of them being safe and legal labour. If you go to the next slide. So under this pillar, we have what we call our Fisher Work and Welfare Programme. And I'm going to explain how we got started and how we implement the programme. And then Leah is going to go on to give some examples of the work we're doing. So the Fisher Work and Welfare Programme started in 2017 with the publication of our Vessel Code of Conduct. This was conceived within our agreement with Greenpeace, and it developed in collaboration with the International Transport Workers Federation. And following on from Christine, we did that with ILO C188 at the side of it. We've developed this to be available now in several languages, and it's all available on our website. And we also have a number of other documents and parts of the programs like auditor handbooks and improvement projects. So we have approached the program using a due diligence or a risk-based approach as on one of the other slides. And this started really in 2018 with us commissioning consultants to complete third-party audits in 2 priority areas. Firstly, tuna vessels, and then secondly, Thai fishing vessels. And in the last year, we've moved on to starting to audit in other geographies and for other species now. And we're going to continue to develop the documents this year to keep up with the best practice, keeping them under review. And I've listed on the slide, which has got a lot of information on it, some of the steps which have been really important to deliver the programme, and I have a read through. I'm just going to mention a couple of them. So the first one on the list is conducting the audits. Now, conducting the audits against the code has provided us with a lot of information. And this is what we've kind of used to go forward and advise our suppliers and customers and many others about the actual situation that we found and the consultants have found on board fishing vessels. And we've used this information to develop action plans to improve conditions and to improve work at sea. Making sure the audits included enough time and resource for the consultants to conduct confidential interviews with the crew has been essential to making sure that the programme worked for the fishers, and it opened up a really good communication channel between the fishers through the consultants to us and the vessel owners. And the whole programme really opened up a dialogue between us and the vessel owners. And this has been really important to have those conversations about all of the different aspects that Christine put in the slide and all of the principles within our code of conduct. And so this is what we've got in place. And if you move on a slide, I'm going to outline how we've driven this continuous improvement on board the fishing vessels. And well, I can tell you, it definitely takes a lot of effort to deliver this change on the water. We've been working at it a number of years now, but I can tell you the first thing about delivering any kind of success is that we have to work closely with our suppliers and the supply chains. They've been absolutely essential, particularly because logistics to implement a program like this is not easy at all. And what we've developed and what we found with the program is developing trust and active listening on both sides. We're able to facilitate more change and develop more projects together. And really through all this, we believe that our suppliers are now better equipped to understand the requirements in conventions like 188, and also a lot of new certification standards and programs and codes that are coming up. What we've often found is that we've been asking questions to the vessel owners or the fishers for the first time on topics that really they hadn't considered before. And I definitely know we understand the perspective of the crew and the vessel owners much better. And then through the shared understanding, we've been able to have a better dialogue to adapt to deliver solutions which work for everybody and something that's actually implementable. So the whole process is a bit of a top down, with kind of us at one end of the supply chain asking for changes, and then also bottom up by making sure that we ask the crew what are their priorities for their work, and also following up with the crew to make sure that any changes are working for them and it hasn't worked to their disadvantage somehow or something. So just making sure everything's worked properly. And then lastly on the list, actually, one of the most time-consuming parts of the programme is that engagement piece, going up and down, as I mentioned, and actually into the wider sector. But it's actually one of the most rewarding and energising pieces, this, effectively running a 4-year capacity building programme, for all of us, really. And the messages that we learn from the fishers and the vessel owners, as Thai Union in the middle, we're able to relay a lot of these messages up through technical advisory groups or committees and meetings like this that we're part of. And then conversely, we're able to relay to the fishing industry what the markets are aiming for and new conventions and things, and ultimately that somebody cares in the supply chain about how good their working is and if they're happy. And I remember that this specific message came when I was shadowing on board one of the vessels in the Seychelles. And a fisher said in his interview that in 20 years, he wasn't aware of anyone ever asking him this and didn't know that anyone cared. So he was really pleased to be engaged in the programme. And we hear a lot of these kind of stories all the time, which is super inspiring to keep going and making some changes. So I'll hand over to Leah now, and she will take you through.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we wanted to show some examples of the fisheries where we've had some success in implementing effective improvements. And one of those is in Ghana. So we've had the most success here because we have employed the support from a local consultant. We have facilities based there, so we can base our work out of them. And also the vessels are part of an association. So it's really easy to bring them together to discuss things as a collective. The local consultant was hired to be present in the ports, but also to provide extra support for the suppliers. He's now recognised by the local crew members. They meet regularly with him, especially the second officers. And this relationship has worked really well. For example, through the crew interviews, the crew were able to report some concerns about not having private sanitary areas. And then we were then able to work with that supplier to put up some cubicles, put up some shower curtains, which you can see on this slide here in that picture. And this has been very positively received by the crew members, as you can probably imagine. So we confirm all of the improvements through third-party audits just to verify and make sure that the improvements are effective and also that they are appreciated by the crew members. And we found in Ghana that they really do appreciate systems being in place and they often do refer back to them when we're speaking to them. The basis of a lot of the improvement work in Ghana has been off the back of the health and safety risk assessments, which we developed through for our suppliers through our facilities based in Ghana. So the consultant has now been working with them to make sure that they're meeting their risk mitigation measures. As a result of the programme, we're now able to track back the results through the years from the audit findings, and we can see a vast difference from 2018 when the programme wasn't fully meeting expectations and through to 2023 with the help of our consultant on the ground. So we now have some great stories coming out of Ghana, such as the shower curtain and things like that. And although there are still improvements that are yet to be made, it's really nice to go back and hear from the crew members that they feel like they're being listened to, and also refreshing to have our suppliers come on as much as they have done. And they now really understand the importance of some of these social improvements. For example, one of our suppliers is now going above these requirements and is extending their insurance policy above their legal obligations to cover more members of the crew members' family. And they're also now paying overtime, which unfortunately isn't something that we see regularly in fishing. If we could jump to the next slide, please. Another example is working closely with our supplier based in Mauritius. So the fishery is made up of Malaysian and Taiwanese flagged vessels, and they have predominantly Indonesian crew on board. So this owner has been very willing to work with us in hand with the consultants as well. He's been really responsive and has been implementing many actions that have come out of the third-party audits. Again, there are still improvements to be made, but there are some good examples of what we've managed to achieve, such as checking the safety equipment, health and safety training. We've got clock in and clock out systems, new details in the crew contracts, new pay slips, and also the crew have an increased understanding about their payments. So Thai Union has really invested a lot of time and money for various improvement projects into this fishery, but we're also now seeing the same from the vessel owner, who has recently invested into employing a new crew manager. He is of the same nationality as the crew, so he's Indonesian and he's able to work with the crew directly in port. We've also conducted at-sea assessments last year. From what we know of, I think this was the first time a private company has paid for someone to be on a carrier vessel to assess the work and welfare during transshipment. Over a 6-week deployment, 19 vessels were assessed, and based on the results, we were able to deepen our knowledge about further actions that could be taken to improve the living conditions. So these include communication with medically trained professionals, increased first aid awareness for the crew members, and better sleeping arrangements. So these improvements have shown some really positive changes, especially for the crew members, and we hope to continue our work in this sphere. So thank you all for listening, and I'll hand back over to you, Garrett.
Thank you so much. It's great to hear about those improvements and the progress that's been made. So before we go into question and answer, but please be thinking about your questions for Christine, Tracy, and Leah. We do want to remind you that the three recommendations, and we'll drop these into the chat so you can copy and paste them into your notes, but around advocating and for the ratification and implementation of these international agreements, about how to identify and assess risk for workers, how to evaluate vessel behavior, and then how to integrate these findings to engage with suppliers and work with local organizations. So following today's webinar, what are some immediate next steps you can take? First, share this webinar. There will also be a one-pager that we'll send out accompanying the recording, and share this with colleagues and suppliers to start the conversation. consider signing up for the next webinar and take the 15-minute free RISE e-learn on decent work at sea. And if you have a little bit more time, identify what mechanisms you have in place to engage workers and how you can evaluate what supply chain information is available and what can it tell you about your vessel behaviors. And then finally, consider working with a consultant to deeper your engagement with these vessels and develop a strategy to improve working conditions and vessels at sea. So with that, I do want to turn it over to question and answer. Another big thank you to our speakers for being here today. So if you have any questions for them, please use the Q&A feature, and we'll be monitoring that. But while you guys are thinking of questions, I just wanted to talk about, have a question about how important is commercial influence in driving change on the water? Do boats and suppliers tend to listen more to their biggest customers, or is it not as simple as that? So that's probably a question more for Thai Union, but similarly, Christine, I wouldn't think about it in the terms of ILO. How strong is the market voice, and how important is that for encouraging countries to ratify C-188? So
yeah, I'm interested to hear from Christine as well on that engagement piece and how important they think it is. I think from our side, I think we've explained a bit. I think it's been really crucial for us actually, and it came from us and our willingness to want to do this, but it also came from pressure and support and guidance from ITF and Greenpeace. As I explained, we kind of got our steer on what direction the code should go in from those guys. So this was really important. The bit that's been very clear, and actually over the last few years, is this space has got a little bit more noisy in terms of which codes, which standards and things like that. What we've found and we've kind of maintained with our suppliers is just this clear message on what it is they've got to do. What we see a lot of and what we don't want to, it's quite a complex space and things. What we wouldn't want to have to do for all the vessels is have a multitude of audits and standards. So what we're trying to do at the moment is ensure, because coming up and doing an improvement plan to meet one standard or one code at the moment, there's so many fishing vessels that require this kind of attention and capacity building that we wouldn't like to confuse the vessels on having multiple audits in the same year and then having multiple improvement plans, when actually what we're finding, we invest a lot of time and effort in engaging with the other certification standards and multi-stakeholder initiatives that are working on this, we're trying to make sure we can share information, understand each other's programs where there are differences, or mostly where there's similarities. Some of the standards, actually 75% of the technical content and the clauses or principles, they're very aligned with SA 8000 standards or ILO 188 clauses and principles in the convention and things. So I feel there's quite a nice drumbeat, and I think if commercial entities and supply chains can make sure that going forward the message stays the same, and drumbeat and improvement, this real drumbeat on continuous improvement and investing in on the water change, I think it will, commercial involvement could be very good for the industry.
Yeah, thank you. Christine, do you have anything to add, thinking about the influence of, the voice of the market in ratification?
So I would say the influence is big, though, how do you say, indirect, if I may say, because our instruments are, of course, directed, our instruments on fishing, our main instrument, is directed at flag states and port states. So we don't create obligations for market states. But of course, market states and consumers, really the power of consumers, right? That have ethical considerations and now care about the working conditions of people putting the fish on their plate. that goes a long way in pressure to ratify or even just implement the principles of Convention 188. And then pressure from some markets can play on other states to get their act together and look at the fishing sector and clean it. But it is kind of an indirect influence because, for instance, I mean, it happened that countries, you know, prohibit, or in the EU it will happen, you know, forced labor products to be imported. So that plays on seafood products, of course, and then it can lead to certain states having to look into their national law and practice in terms of working conditions in the fishery sector.
I was gonna come in with another comment following that up, Garrett. Sorry, and it's really good, Christy. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because and I loved your slide on the level playing field, which clearly was not level at all. And I think that's for us as a big seafood producer, that is really, I normally end, I only had 10 minutes though, Garrett was very firm. I normally end with the last slide on those ratification and implementation of those four conventions actually. And I think for us, that's what I feel like I'm doing a lot of work that prepares the vessels. For example, this is perhaps, Christine, the example. We're doing that work with our suppliers, with, as Leah provided the example of Ghana. Ghana has the largest tuna fishing fleet in Africa. We've done the work, a lot of the work, to prep these vessels, and the Tuna Association, to when the Ghana Labour Minister of Labour comes to talk to them, to say, what do you think of this? They can say, actually, we've done the work, don't mind at all if you ratify and implement the thing. We're already nearly there. What you really need to, you know, and the tuna industry can be proud, and they can say, it's those boats over there you need to go and talk to. We're not sure they've been doing anything. And I think, as you said, Christine, in your presentation, it's that we need to provide this fair economic situation for the vessels that are trying now. And this is where I'm going to be pushing really hard over the next few years. But that's where my expertise and kind of realm, as far as I can go. I mean, we meet with the Department of Labour, and we will be meeting, you know, in Thailand, in Ghana, in Seychelles, where we have facilities and a lot of connections. This is somewhere we can have these conversations to make the governments feel confident that this is the kind of thing that we're doing. And Leah has done a great job in Mauritius. We're having STCWF. I used to work for the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency implementing that. I feel very passionate about the standardizing the level of certification and qualification for seafarers. We're going to be training, doing training above and beyond their pre-departure requirements soon. And we want to observe whether this makes the seafarers feel more confident, more secure at sea, whether we can get those injury rates down, whether we can make sure that the level of injuries or sickness that are turning serious don't happen. And it's that real, and I think the word, you've said it, I've said it, I think everyone said it, is care. It's that real care about the industry, caring for each other, and getting the governments to make sure they know that everybody cares from a consumer perspective. So yeah. And
that is where we, I mean, we need each other, because the ILO, yes, provides training of inspectors, provides capacity building of employers, organizations, workers organizations, but of course cannot do micro, you know, level managing these things. And you cannot do without, hopefully, what follows, the public governance, the commitment by ratifying and by implementing, law enforcement actually by government, so that these, you know, you were mentioning clauses in contracts, which is really good, but if the, you know, if there's a law at some point saying, okay, these clauses need to be in all the contracts in the fisheries sector.
My dream.
Yeah, so yeah, so it is really, that's why it makes sense to, you know, work together. And
yeah.
That's great. Well, I do see, I know we are over time, but just one more question that came through the Q&A feature from Connor. Says, thank you all for the presentation, this amazing work. Regarding sea change, what kind of disclosures are you making both between peer companies and to the public? And does that transparency cover both successes and failures? If you just want to take a moment to speak to that.
Yeah, that's no problem. And Connor, we've been quite bold actually, and I've been really proud of the stance we've taken on being transparent about the findings we've had. If you look through our annual sustainability reports for the last 3 years, so maybe we're about to do our 4th year since we published this standard. The chapter on the section on fisher work and welfare has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger as the years have gone on. And yes, we've included, you know, ran it through comms, ran it through senior leadership, and they were all like, no, we've got to include these details of, yeah, we went on and the consultants went on board a vessel, and the crew showed a photo of a guy that doesn't work on the vessel anymore. He was on it, but he had a bruise on his neck, and apparently this is where the captain hit him. Obviously he wasn't there anymore. The consultants couldn't do any more interviews. They actually couldn't verify anything. But actually when we went to the supplier and asked them about this, we weren't satisfied that they had the policies and the processes in place to stop this happening in the future. So what we're able to do is suspend sourcing from them from a period of time until they can make the consultants or us happy that they've got something in place. So if you look in, well, like I said, we've tried to be very public about, like, we did a 2-pager last year listing the 12 principles in our code of conduct. It's very copy and pasty from the ILO C188. We've tried to translate it as best we could, Christine, to make it workable. But against each of those principles, last year we did this double page of what were the key areas for improvements that we felt the industry or everyone, so we're trying to mean that everyone doesn't need to go and do a load of audits, so that, for instance, Garrett would know, right, what, according to Thai Union's audit findings, have against age or discrimination or grievance mechanisms, what are the bits that we found that should be worked on most? So, no, we're trying to use, we haven't published vessel by vessel information. We've done graphs aggregating, like, for example, for all the tuna audits, we produced a graph with the amount of areas for improvement that we found against each of the principles on the vessels, so you can see how likely they were to come up in the tuna sector. So yeah, we've tried. Happy to answer more questions if you review them and email me afterwards, that's fine.
Great. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with us today and answering those questions. And like we said, it's, yeah, all about care, continuous improvement, moving forward and going on this journey together and making steps in the right direction. So thank you for being here with us today. And we will be sending this recording out so you can share along with a follow-up 1-pager. And thank you again to our speakers. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.